I'm Oliver Pickard and welcome to my workshop in beautiful Limousin, France. Today we're going to be starting on Pandora's roll cage and we're going to be fabricating our main hoop. But before we get stuck into that, I just want to give everyone who may be unfamiliar with roll cages a quick education on the different sorts. Now there's a bunch of subcategories and we could get nitpicky, but I want to keep things as simple as absolutely possible. So we're going to say there are four main sorts of roll cages. The first is the sort you'll find on a Caterham or many MX-5s or even some Porsches, and it's a half cage. A half cage is the simplest sort. It's a hoop at the back, some stairs, a diagonal and maybe a harness bar. And you can order them online. You have to weld in some anchoring points into your chassis or your floor, and then you can just bolt it in. It's great. They come prefabricated in most cases, and you can just pop it in your car. The great streetable cages that don't offer all the protection in the world, but they do offer a great amount of rigidity for many older cars, because older chassis, classic cars, tend to have a lot less chassis rigidity than modern cars, and they also offer added safety. It's like I say, it's not the end. It's not the end of the world as far as safety is concerned, but it is a lot better than most factory cars, especially older ones that don't have any sort of side or rollover protection built into the monocoque. The next sort is a bolt-in cage, and a bolt-in cage is very similar to your half cage, but it comes forward, and it has the same sort of feet that you have to weld in plates for, and then you just bolt them in. But it has door bars. It comes along the roof. And it's exactly the same as a roll hoop, but it's a lot more comprehensive and usually has a diagonal bar, so if you have back seats, you'll usually have to sacrifice your back seats. But the great thing about a bolting cage is you can actually remove that diagonal bar for street use and stuff like that. So you do gain back some of your usability, but they do tend to be not quite as tailored to the shape of your car as they could be, so they do tend to kind of be more visible from the outside of your car through the windows and stuff like that. They do come far away from your pillars, and they do tend to be a bit general as far as fitting goes. They're not the tightest and nicest fitting because they usually come as prefabricated parts that have to be able to be brought in through doors and stuff like that. They're great, but they're not the most rigid thing in the world, and they're not the safest thing in the world, although they are a lot safer than no cage. So they are the main pick for most people building a fast car at home. The next sort of roll cage, now we're getting serious, now we're getting into the proper stuff. The next one is a welding cage, and a welding cage is a fabricated roll cage. You can buy them as kits, but the term kit is very general. They'll come as pre-bent hoops that you then have to weld together. It's a big box full of tubes, basically. Or you can make one yourself with the correct roll cage tubing and the correct tools. And that is a full and comprehensive roll cage that is welded into your vehicle. So you'll have to cut holes in your floor in order to get hoops in, and then you'll have to put plates on the bottom and weld it all together. You'll have to weld all your tubes together. These are brilliant, and they add a bunch of real rigidity to your car. And you can even add plates that weld your roll cage to the bodywork of your car as well, which is superb. It adds a bunch of rigidity. It does add a lot of weight, but it is the safest thing that you can possibly have in your car. And because you are tailoring it to your specific car, it can fit a lot closer to the bodywork, and it can be more tucked in. And that's where real fabrication shines in a welding cage. There are many people who do welding cages. There are some people who do some amazing welding cages that are utterly beautiful to look at and are so tucked up and stuff you don't even see them from the outside of the car. Then there is the fourth sort of roll cage, and this is the rarest sort of roll cage. Now, this sort of roll cage was invented by the Americans. When the Americans started doing saloon car and NASCAR racing, they realized that American cars weren't necessarily, I might upset some Americans by saying this, but American cars weren't necessarily well designed for going around corners. They were very heavy, they were very floppy, and that leads to kind of wayward handling and not very good cars, not very good racing cars. They were comfortable, not so good for racing. And when roll cages were brought in to NASCAR, the engineers at NASCAR, the engineers at the racing teams who were building the cars were resistant, shall we say, to the idea of a roll cage, and some roll cages may have been fabricated out of wood and made to look like metal to kind of get around rules, because they saw it as adding a bunch of weight, which most roll cages are. But some clever people started getting ideas. They started looking at things like helicopters, because helicopters also have a roll cage and a chassis, but it's the same thing. It's called a space frame, and these are a bunch of triangulated tubes that create a hugely strong structure for the amount of weight they have. So the NASCAR engineers thought, I know, we'll build a space frame chassis in our existing chassis. They couldn't get rid of the body and the chassis that they had, but what they could do is use the roll cage to strengthen the chassis that they had. And this is also now used in World Rally. It's one of the few NASCAR technology things that's actually trickled into other motorsports. And World Rally cars are based on production shells, but they're a lot lighter than your average production shell. And then they often acid dip them, or they used to acid dip them to remove as much material as possible and make them as thin as possible, and then the roll cage is actually what gives them their real rigidity. So you're basically building a chassis inside your chassis, and this is the sort of roll cage that I'm going to be doing on Pandora, because this classic chassis was designed in 1969. And technology has come along a lot since then, but it's a really good basis for a chassis. And I also want a roll cage, but I don't want to add a bunch of weight. I want my chassis and my roll cage to weigh the same as just the chassis. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're starting with the main hoop, so let's just talk about that. So let's count our tubes. I know it seems a bit Sesame Street, but we have this tube here, one, we have this tube, and then there's a tube on the back of that, so that's 3. And then we have a tube, well, a piece of box section here, so that's 4. So we can replace, or what if we replace 4 tubes, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course 4 on that side. What if we replace it with 1 tube? What if we make our roll bar travel through here and replace all of this? We no longer need it, and we'll be replacing it with a much stronger tube than even the original roll bar was made of. That's creating stiffness and rigidity in our car, because the new roll hoop will actually be bigger and a bigger arc than this was, but it's also getting rid of a bunch of steel. So that's how I'm going to be doing Pandora's chassis. It is a chassis with a roll cage built inside it. There are a couple of different ways of measuring up for a roll hoop. One of them is where you measure your widths of where your roll hoop will be, and then you measure the distance between those widths, and you draw the roll bar out on the floor, basically, and then you bend your tubing to that plan. The other way, for kind of trickier roll bars, is where you use cardboard and bits of whatever you've got laying around, and you actually make a template that you can hold in the car that you can then translate to tubing. And that's why I'm cutting up this cardboard box, because this is a very tricky roll cage to do, and it's so tricky is this roll hoop that I can't even get in to measure it in some places. So the easiest way to do it is with a cardboard template. Oh, it's all come apart. So I've been collecting cardboard boxes for weeks to get this all planned out. So I'm going to make a cardboard template now of the roll cage. We'll need to do half of it potentially, because obviously the other side is a mirror image of it. But to get the bends in the right places, because this is going through bodywork and stuff, it's quite tricky. and that's why a template's necessary. This is why I'm not measuring it with a tape measure. You thread cardboard through where your first bend will be, careful not to tear the cardboard. Like that. And then I can cut that on an angle and add my next cardboard strip from there. And what I'm basically doing is I'm trying to get the contour of the inside of the body so that I can then replicate that in steel. So I can get another piece of cardboard, thread it in through the top here. If you want to zoom out a little bit, get my next piece of cardboard, and put it down through here. It's a giant faff, is what it is. And that then gives me approximately the angle of the dangle. Now I need a piece of tape, and then of course I'm going to join this to another piece, and it will give me the rough outline of the shape of what shape the roll cage needs to be. Sometimes the technical drawing, like really nice, pretty engineering type way of doing things, is okay. But sometimes shapes are just so complex, you actually need to get in there with your hands and make a proper template. Because sometimes things are so, like I say, some things are so complex, like trying to get a tape measure between these 2 points and all of that, you're just not going to be able to do it. 3D scanning technology is the futuristic way of doing this, but cardboard is the old-fashioned way of doing this. And we'll get another cardboard strip and tape it along there, and that will roughly give us the shape of our roll cage. Again, it's not perfect, it's a rough outline, and only the outside of this is going to matter. This is one of the issues of making such a complex roll hoop. If you can't get a camera in to actually show what shape your roll hoop needs to be, a tape measure doesn't stand a chance. So the other bonus of cardboard, of course, is that if you need a third hand and you need to hold it somewhere, you can actually just tape it too. And like I said, I don't need this side, I only need to make half, because the mirror image of this side is that side. This template is the radius that my pipe bender can actually bend at, because of course you can imagine any angle known to man, but a roll bar needs to be made of one piece of tubing bent all the way around. It's no good having joined, you can't cut it and weld it at an angle. It has to be one piece of metal that runs continuously all the way around, and of course it has to be seamless tubing. So I've chopped that out, and now I can overlay this onto my cutout and see how that translates to cardboard. And this is a 90 obviously, and the answer is not mine. It's less than 90. That's the answer. On the centre line. I can hold it against. Yeah, it's less than 90, but it will bend it, which is good news, because it fits better than the original template. So yeah, that's absolutely no problem for my pipe bender to bend, and neither is this one down here, which is just a slight kink. But if it was straight, it wouldn't actually fit in the shell of the car. So this is what it is. Right, we need to get this out now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually lift the body off the car rather than trying to get this piece of cardboard out without ripping it. I think that's the easiest way of doing it. Some said it couldn't be done, but here we are, the K20a engine from a Honda Integra DC5 Type R inside the diminutive body of Pandora. It took a lot of measuring and a little bit of cutting, but it fits beautifully. It's as if the engine was actually designed to fit inside the body. Everything lines up. Important for me to get the engine as far forward as possible, not only for weight balance, but for boot space, and to keep the wheelbase the same. After all, that really short wheelbase is one of the main characteristics of a Cox GTM, and so it had to stay. The wheelbase is a couple of millimeters longer, but only a couple of millimeters longer. I was really impressed at how this engine lines up. Even the throttle body is angled back into the engine bay so it can be connected to a cold air intake. I couldn't have designed this better myself. These wheels are actually not the wheels that are going on Pandora. I know many people have asked about them. They are from an Alpine A110 1600 and are actually the wrong size for Pandora, but they're a lot better than the wheels that Pandora came with. So I'm using them as a mock-up tool only. Welcome to my incredibly complex mock-up. I've put the engine on a pallet that's on casters so I can move that about, and I've made this platform that's on adjustable legs. It's not a proper chassis table, it's just to hold things off the floor for now and so that I can work not on a cold concrete floor. But our roll cage mock-up is still attached firmly to the body shell, and I've actually clearanced the body shell to make sure that the engine fits. So we can now look inside. This is why the table was important, to remove the body from the body shell, and I can now look inside at where my roll cage will be and see what it will hit. As I explained in a previous video, this hoop is going to be kind of the nucleus of the roll cage. This is the beginning of the roll cage, and every single bar, this is the datum point. That's the engineering term. But basically every single tube in the roll cage is going to emanate, and everything that we do on this car is going to be measured from this line and this point in the car, which is the roll bar. And so it is vital that it is absolutely correct. So it's really worth taking the time and just making sure it's right, because it has to be perfect. I'll place this inside our roll cage and do the same thing that we did before. So we need to find the point where both the cardboard template I made before and the radius line up, which is about here. So tape that. It has to line up here. Yeah, there we go. Like that, and find the point where they both line up. Right, so I'm just going to chop my radius down in order to see what I'm doing a bit better, because it's very in the way. But right, I'm happy with that. So it needs more finessing and more trimming, but what I'm actually going to do at this point is I'm going to lift it out of the car and remove the cardboard template from the shell in order to trim it and finesse it, and then I can put it back in afterwards just to check it all lines up. A new day and much more clothing, because it's absolutely freezing, and we are here in what will be my kitchen living room. We've brought the exterior work table in, which is why it looks like such a mess. This is a table that usually lives outside for cutting wood on and stuff, and is basically sacrificial, which is why it's full of woodworm, but it is the world's heaviest thing. And I've got here the world's second heaviest thing, my homemade pipe bender. This pipe bender, if you haven't seen it on the channel before, is basically made out of scrap metal. It is the most Mad Max thing that I own, and it's made out of pieces of Harbour Freight pipe bender, bits of kitchen unit. There's a lovely and highly expensive pipe bender die in there, but there's also some acro, there's some bottle jack, and there's a bunch of big nuts and bolts. This stand, which it's mounted on, which allows us to rotate it, is made of the plate that you bolt to an engine to put it inside an engine stand, and that was actually fitted. I don't own an engine stand, but this came fitted to my Honda K20a when I bought it, so we've put it to good use. And it requires 2 large men and another acro to put underneath, and you pull them against each other, and that pulls a die around and bends this beautiful seamless roll cage tubing. And the way to do it, the tendency, a lot of people don't understand pipe benders, but the tendency when you get a pipe bender at first and you do something like an arch, is to do the top 2 bends first and then the second bends, so that you get the distance right on the top. The problem is with a pipe bender like this, there's a thing called bend allowance, or with any pipe bender really. And bend allowance is when you bend the tubing, it sucks tubing in. And so if you do things in the wrong order, it's really easy to accidentally make the top of your roll cage hoop too short. And so the way to do it is actually to do it in order. So you do 1, 2, 3, 4, and down, you know? And then instead of doing 2 and 3 and then 1 and 4, that's not the way to do it. Otherwise, it ends up all funny shaped and not fitting the car. So let's get stuck in, shall we? Because it's not getting warmer. So after a full day's work, I haven't got much to show for it, but that's because it all went to plan, thankfully. I didn't film a bunch of the bending, but as you can see, it now comes up here, the roll bar, and it disappears out of view, far away from my head, which is the very good news. And I didn't film a bunch of the bending because it would have been, you know, hours and hours of footage of me measuring a piece of tubing again and again and again and again to make sure I get it right. It's one of those things, because I'm using a homemade pipe bender, I have to be extra OCD and I have to really, really pay attention to what I'm doing just to make sure everything's right, because there's a little bit of flex in the pipe bender and things like that, and you know, a millimetre here and a millimetre there, and before you know it, you've got a problem. So I'm just really being diligent. And if the camera comes round though, you can see now the body isn't clearanced yet, and as you can see, Pandora is made up of, well, her body has been repaired here. This is from an older GTM, whereas this was the original Pandora. But you can see how the roll bar will run along the back here, and it runs down through this neck vent and all the way to the floor. Over on this chassis, the reason why it runs to the floor is because it's designed to sit at the bottom here. And it doesn't fit on this chassis because there's sill in the way, and it doesn't quite fit on it's not a proper chassis table. It's a platform that I've made so I don't have to kneel down on it's level, but it's only a platform that I've made so I don't have to kneel down on the cold garage floor, because it is rather chilly. In fact, it was supposed to snow today, but it hasn't, so I feel very fortunate. But yeah, I'm really, really happy with how this has turned out. This just looks superb. It's very nondescript, it's not obvious, it's nice and tight to the body. And like I say, I do have a plan about what I'm going to do with this roll bar. Don't worry, I'm not completely mad. There is method to my madness, just like getting the engine to fit. Oh, by the way, the body is now sat at a better height, a more realistic height to how it will sit in the car. So as you can see, it actually fits a lot better, which is really good news, than it did. I set it at I set the body right down just to make sure I had no clearance problems at all. so that I can get things in and out and stuff like that. I need a hole that's slightly larger than my engine, not a hole the exact shape and size of my engine. But it's been a really, really productive few days. I've got the engine situated in the body, I know it all fits, I know my roll bar fits. The next thing to do is to put some legs on this roll bar and bring it down and forward and down to the floor. And of course add some door bars, and then I can start adding in panels. I can add the inner sills in and stuff like that. I'm really, really happy though about how it's all come about. And that's the thing, I didn't want to make a roll bar and this section here, like this square tubing. Before we had, I can get the roll bar, there we go. Before we had a roll bar and we had a firewall, but why is there tubing here and tubing there? It didn't make any sense to me. And of course there's tubing here. So what I did, I brought the roll bar back, and now the one piece of roll cage tubing does the job of 1, 2, 3 bits of metal, 4 if you count the back, and it becomes a proper solid jacking point. So I'm really, really happy. You know, it's that Colin Chapman thing of, what if every single component in a car did more than one job? You know, if everything does 2 or 3 jobs, you need half as many parts, and your car weighs half as much, and hopefully goes twice as fast. But yeah, really, really happy with it. And like I said, it doesn't look like much, but to say that just the other day this was a collection of parts all over my garage, and now there is an engine in a body. Okay, it's just mocked up, and there is a roll hoop that's okay, it's just mocked up, but it is a start. We have parts to start building a car, and I'm really, really happy with it. So thank you all for watching. Please be awesome to each other. I've just noticed this the other day, only 25% of the, 24.9% of the people who watch these videos are subscribed to my channel. Please, one of the best ways you can support me or any other YouTube channel is by subscribing. It's just down there. It's a button at the end of this video that looks like my face. Click on my face and you will be subscribed to my channel. Like I say, it's one of the best ways to support me. It lets YouTube know I exist, and that's a huge deal, because that gets these videos recommended to people who will really enjoy them. And if you really enjoy them and you have friends who you will think will really enjoy them, then make sure you share the videos on social media and stuff with your friends as well, because that means the world to me. Thank you very much for watching. I'm very, very tired now, can you tell? Please be awesome to each other, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.